I want you to better understand compression. And I say that because when I see a lot of people using compressors in a mix, I can tell they don't really know why they're using it in the first place. They're just putting it on because they've seen a bunch of other engineers do the exact same thing and they think that's how it should be. But compression is a specific tool that you should use for a specific set of reasons. And in today's video, I wanted to overview 5 specific reasons, or maybe even 5 specific situations, if you will, that you should consider using a compressor in your mix. So if you're somebody who's not really sure if you should be using a compressor at any given point, maybe you don't know enough at this stage, don't worry, I'm going to help you out in today's video. Are you ready? Let's go. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is your boy 5P's producer and engineer extraordinaire. Thank you for checking out this video. We're about to get very specific and talk about some situations that you should consider using a compressor in. But don't you worry, while they are specific, you're going to find that these pop up more often than not in most mixes. At any given point, you're probably going to deal with 1, 2, maybe even 3 of these, maybe even all 5. It's really going to depend on your song and what it's made up of. And by the way, throughout this video, while I am going to explain some things, I'm definitely going to be linking out to some of my other videos that will go a little bit deeper and maybe explain the process that I'm highlighting a little bit better. So if you want to learn more, definitely pay attention throughout the video for some cards in the top corner, or feel free to check the description below. But with that in mind, let's talk about the first situation that you might find yourself in where you should consider using a compressor. And that is to even out volume inconsistencies in a performance. And that could apply to a vocal or a synth or really any sound that's in a mix. Now, I find that this obviously applies very often to a vocal because vocals are very dynamic in nature. We might be extremely loud and dynamic at moments, and then other moments we might be very quiet, subdued, maybe even whispering. And there's some very big extremes there, right? Especially because we're actually recording vocals, and that also will be affected by someone's distance from the mic and how they're moving when they're performing on the mic. Whereas if we're playing like a digital instrument, we may not necessarily need to compress that or even that out unless we're actually playing with the velocity there. This is a whole separate thing. But really what I'm saying here is we want to use the compressor to bring down the louder stuff and bring up the quieter stuff, so that way that performance or that take is a lot more even in volume and therefore easier to hear for the listener, because a lot of times the quieter parts might get buried or lost in a mix, and then those louder parts will really poke out and stick out in a mix, and we want to avoid that in both situations. And you can actually tell here, I got a vocal take here, and you can see that obviously the volume is varying at different times, right? You can see that this looks significantly quieter than the second part, right? And even parts of a phrase, so for example, this part is quieter than the second half, right? We can use a compressor to bridge the gap between all of these volume differences and make sure that they ultimately sound good. Now, I find that I'm constantly compressing vocals to make this happen, but of course, if you really wanted to do that painstaking detail work, you could avoid using a compressor and just do things like using volume automation where you're going in and turning things up and turning other things down, etc. But that's going to be a lot of painstaking work. The compressor just makes your life so much easier, and if you want to still do some of that after the fact, you can, but it'll probably just save you some of that upfront work. So why don't I play this moment real quick, but what I want to do is also bypass my effects so we have no reverb or delays or any of that stuff. I'm going to solo this. I'm going to get rid of all the plugins that follow the compressor. I'll also get rid of the compressor. I'll put it in and take it out. And let's hear the volume difference and how much we're able to bridge it using this compressor. This is of course not going to fully solve everything, but it's going to do a little bit of work and push us in the right direction. Check this out.
Yeah, you don't know. I've been trying to get going. Yeah, you don't know. I've been trying to get going. Yeah, you don't know. I've been trying to get going. Yeah, you don't know. I've been trying to get going. Yeah, you don't know.
So as you can tell, it's somewhat subtle, right? But at the same time, you could definitely tell that this part is significantly louder than the quieter part. But then after, when I put this in, there's definitely still a volume difference between the two. We're not denying that that's going to fully go away, but it's a little bit closer. And of course, in context, when I do this, it'll be hopefully a little bit easier to hear this quieter part. So let's actually do that. Let's take this out and double check. Here we go.
Yeah, you don't know. I've been trying to get going, but I'm staying low. Yeah, you don't know. I've been trying to get going, but I'm staying low. Yeah, you don't know. I've been trying to get going, but I'm staying low.
And hopefully you can hear the difference there, right? Of course, we're benefiting from gain, but it's also just reducing these louder parts so that they're a little bit more even and in line with this first part. Now, if you want to see a cool video about compression and how to use it on vocals specifically, including how to dial in the settings and all that good stuff, I'll leave a link to a video I did up above right now or in the description below. So definitely check that out if you want to learn more about how to set up a compressor from scratch and see all the settings and how I approach doing that. Now, the second reason why I'd want to use a compressor in a mix is to control ADSR. And I got to be honest, I'm not always using a compressor for this. I would much rather rely on strategic volume automation or clip gain automation, but a compressor can come in handy if you really don't know what you're doing or if you need a way to do it quickly and easily and efficiently. Now, what I mean by ADSR is attack, decay, sustain, release, right? Attack is how much the signal or how loud the signal comes in. Decay is how it tapers off. Sustain is how long it lingers. Release is how fast it lets go. Basically, I'm really simplifying here, but that's really how to think about it. And let's say that I really wanted to reduce the initial attack of a sound. So like this stuff, right? Like these are kicks on a drum bus. Really, this is a print of a drum bus. Let's say I wanted to reduce those, and then at the same time, I wanted to increase all this other stuff, right? Or maybe I wanted to actually be a little bit more specific. Maybe I just wanted to reduce the attack of the beginning here and then increase the volume of the second half, right? This would be where the release is. I can actually use compressor settings to do that, right? Because our comp and every other compressor has the attack and release setting, right? So if I really wanted to clamp down on a beginning of a signal and reduce it, maybe to prevent peaking or maybe to create some sort of effect like sound design, I'm going to obviously increase the attack so that it happens right away. And if I want the release to linger, if I really want this sound to be suppressed, I'll also have a slow release. But in the case if I want a louder release, if I want my sustain to be a little bit more loud, I can actually reduce the release so that it happens quicker and then add some gain. I'm really doing this quickly here, but I really just want to make sure you understand that you can use compression as a way to manipulate how a sound actually is perceived, right? By either increasing or decreasing the attack and doing the same for the release or the sustain of a sound by using the release variable. Now let's play with the ADSR on this specific drum group. I'm not 100% sure this will sound the greatest, but I just want to show you how you can use a compressor to manipulate it and potentially create something that's unique and that you may want to use in your own track. And by the way, I find that this is better used more of as an effect rather than as something that you're going to just slap on all the time. I use this in certain situations and not others. That being said, let's check this out. Now, of course, I wouldn't really keep this like this, at least not as like my main drum sound, but maybe I would, I don't know. But I do find that it's obviously changing the sound, and you can hear the hi-hats, they sound a little bit different, right? A little bit more popped is sort of how I would describe it, right? Even flat in a way. But at the same time, we're not necessarily losing too much volume where it's completely getting lost, at least not for my current POV. Of course, I'm doing this very quickly, but I want to ultimately show you how to use a compressor to manipulate a sound and change the way that it sounds, even if you're just using 2-track audio like I am here. Now, the third reason why you'd want to use a compressor in a mix is to glue sounds together, specifically on an instrumental bus or an instrumental group, but of course this could extend to a vocal group, etc. Usually it's for a bus where all the sounds go to, so you can basically bring them a little bit more together, and really this ties into the first point of reducing volume inconsistencies, but we're doing it to just gel everything together or glue it together, as a lot of people like to say. And you're going to understand what I mean in a minute in this example. So if we focus for a moment here on my instrumental, you're going to see or listen, and I'm going to actually take out this compressor. I'm using a Brainworks Townhouse compressor, and just pay attention to how it sounds and listen to what happens when I put this in. So if you didn't notice, I really want you to maybe scroll back a little bit, listen again, and pay attention to the Rhodes, especially the main keyboard sound. You're going to find that it sounds like everything sounds good. I'm not saying that it doesn't sound good, but what happens is it sounds a little bit disjointed from the drums. And this is on an instrumental group. So this is all my instrument sounds, my drums, the main sounds, the basses, everything that's in this track goes to this bus. And what this bus is ultimately doing is it's making sure that the drums, the hi-hats, the snare, clap, kick, those things are not too excessively loud in comparison to the other sounds in the bus being the keyboard, right? That Rhodes sound that I'm talking about. And you'll find that when I put this in, there really isn't that much of a difference in terms of volume. But what it does is it just makes everything feel a little bit more in line with one another and not so excessively crazy or more dominating over one another. Not in competition with each other is maybe a better way to say it. So I love to use a compressor, especially for this reason, whether it's on this instrumental group as a whole, and again, under those subgroups underneath it. So like a drum group, I'd apply this to. An instrument group, I'd apply this to, like guitars or pianos. A bass group, I would apply this to. And what it'll do is, again, just take all those sounds that are in that group and glue them together so that way they're not poking out too much on top of each other, and ultimately playing nice so that when the person is listening at the end of the day, nothing is poking out too much or coming off as too aggressive. Now, if you want to see a really dope video about mastering compression, and by the way I set up a mastering compressor is almost the exact same way as I set up a compressor on a group. I'm going to leave a link to a video up above or in the description below right now. Definitely check that out. It'll help you elevate your game when it comes to setting up a compressor on a group or on a master. Now, another great way to use compression in a mix is to use sidechain compression to prioritize sounds. A lot of times sounds are clashing with one another, especially if you have a more busy production, right? There's a lot of elements in your track. There's going to be way more things fighting for attention, and a lot of them aren't going to play nice. And a lot of times, a very common situation is that the bass and the kick, for example, don't really work as well together, and it creates a lot of mud, congestion, or maybe even overwhelm in the low end, and that creates problems for the listener and for you as the mixer. Now, in this situation, I've got a compressor on my bass, and what's happening is the kick is triggering a specific band that falls between 160 and 30 hertz. So 30 hertz to 160 hertz, this low end, I want it to be dominated by the kick specifically because I found that this bass, it's very sub-dominant, but so is the kick. And when the two of them are hitting at the exact same time, it can lead to certain overwhelm and a little bit too much happening in that area, and it allows both sounds to ultimately get lost. We don't want that to happen. So I put this compressor on and have it being triggered by the kick, so that way every time the kick hits, the bass gets out of the way and it creates some more room for the kick to be heard. So let's actually play a moment of this, and I'll get rid of this and you can hear how much of a difference this is making. It is somewhat subtle, I'm not going to deny that, but at the same time, this is just helping prioritize the kick once again, and I like what it's doing because that kick is coming out very clearly. And let's not forget that sound selection is extremely important here. You can't just do this and have it work, right? At least for the kick and the bass. You got to choose two sounds that cooperate well with each other. I've already done that here, but now I'm taking it a step further using sidechain compression. And sidechain compression is absolutely not limited to this function on its own, right? You could absolutely use it on other things. I love to use it on vocals, right? To make a vocal stand out over a beat, or to make a vocal stand out with a clashing sound, or if I have two other clashing sounds, maybe two instrument sounds, maybe I want the kick to come out on top of hi-hats. There's so many functions for this. You really just need to understand how it works. And to make that easier for you, I'll leave a link to a video up above right now where I break down how to use sidechain compression on vocals specifically, so that way your vocals are nice and clear and loud and upfront. And the final reason why you should consider using compression is to create thickness. I love to use compression to just make sounds feel a little bit bigger, thicker, more dominant, and it's really going to make a difference when I play this example because I'm hyper aggressively compressing this parallel track, and when I'm doing that and I'm mixing it back in with the dynamic uncompressed tracks being my individual drum sounds, it brings the best of both worlds together. We have the dynamics with the compressed, and what that does is it helps it cut on smaller listening devices specifically. This is 5 piece coming in from the future, and I want to just add a little bit more to this point, and the point is this. by using a compressed version. Compression, what it usually does is it increases sustain on a sound. It's going to reduce the attack and increase the sustain. This goes back to that ADSR point I was making. And what that does is by combining a compressed version of a signal, I'm basically increasing the sustain overall by doing that. And then when I stack it with a dynamic version, basically an unprocessed or uncompressed version of a signal, by stacking the compressed version and uncompressed version, I'm able to get the dynamics and the attack, essentially the transient, those hits, right? The thing that hits on a sound. And at the same time, I'm able to increase its sustain so that it appears like it's more consistent in volume. Hopefully this makes sense, but I'm going to let myself continue with that point. This is not just applicable to drums, it's applicable to everything. I actually parallel compress everything in a session: bass, instruments, vocals, you name it, I parallel compress it. But the thing is, I parallel compress it. I don't directly compress anymore. I do it on the side like this, so that way I'm able to get the best of both worlds. Once again, because especially with drums, you need dynamics. So that being said, let me play this example without the parallel compression channel and then with it. So it might have been more subtle when I put it in, but you definitely noticed it when I took it out. And again, there is a volume difference there. I'm not going to deny that, but we're ultimately bridging the gap between the two here. And this is a really great way to add compression or apply compression to a sound to basically solve number one, to even out those volume inconsistencies, so to speak, but do it in a way that doesn't totally damage dynamics, because in this case, with drums especially, you need your drums to be hitting. And that means we actually want them to be dynamic. We don't want them to get compressed, but they could still benefit from having compression. I have a few videos on this, one about drums and one about vocals. I think both are absolutely worth a watch because I show you some different ways to utilize it. I'll leave a link to both of them in the description below, and I'll leave a link to the vocal one specifically up above because a lot of people have found that one to be the most helpful so far. So whenever these 5 situations appear, definitely consider using a compressor to solve this problem. These are very common problems that you'll probably find pop up in your own mixes, and they might even be popping up right now. So try to find a way to apply this knowledge instantly. And don't forget to click ahead and watch the other videos that I mentioned throughout this video, because they're going to definitely go a little bit deeper and maybe explain step by step how you should actually be implementing these processes that I'm recommending. Now, if you got value out of this video, please smash that like button until it turns blue. I'd really appreciate that because it'll not only help me and my channel do better in the long run, but it'll help the YouTube algorithm know to show videos like this to you and to people like you. So it's actually going to help more people in the long run, and it'll help you because it'll show you more of my content. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. I drop a new video just like this every single week, always focused on helping you sound better and helping you make more money with your music. I'd love to continue helping you on your journey. I just need you to pay the small fee. Like the video and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and you'll be seeing my future content in the coming weeks. All right? Appreciate y'all for watching, and I'll see you soon. Peace.
5.